Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, where inspired women talk about the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness. We keep our conversations honest, our experiences real, and our philosophies exploratory.
We believe that in order to raise incredible humans, we first have to raise ourselves. We know that in order to rock the family, you've got to nourish the mother. If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way. If you desire to integrate this learning practically and supportively into your life, then Soul-Driven Motherhood is your space to go deeper. Head on over to nourishingthemother.com.au or follow any of the links on our socials for Soul-Driven Motherhood.
We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we're so grateful you're here. Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Julie Tenner, normally joined by Bridget Wood. Today I'm just here to do a very quick intro into what is part 2 of our 2-part interview with parenting coach and child rights and equity consultant Tara Broughan and Meg McIntosh, pediatric occupational therapist, parent coach and educator. We really hope that this conversation deepens and widens and sees you in your experience even further than last week's episode, that you gain places and spaces and connection, and I hope some level of outreach from our hearts to yours, that we see your experience, we feel your experience on some level, and we wish to meet that by virtue of having a conversation that we hope widens the perspective and tolerance that we all have as a collective community towards neurodiverse children and their experience of life, as well as the carers for whom are deeply in it every day. So without further ado, here's part 2 of this episode. All right, next question. I'm trying to balance the education system not being set up for neurodiverse or additional needs kids, and homeschooling looks like a better option for him, and that I really don't think I could, maybe don't want to, could afford. Yeah, okay, limiting beliefs. I could flip, maybe. However, I'm concerned the schooling system could make his experience significantly worse and squash his spark. It's a rabbit hole and we are only relatively new to this. From your experience, can you provide any insight or ideas of how other families have managed to meet both the child's and parents' needs in relation to the education system?
Yeah, so I'd say all kids. Like, the education system isn't built for any kid. So that's not who it's serving.
Some can adapt easier.
Yeah.
Than others.
Yeah. So for anyone with neurodiversity, it's going to be a harder run. But what I would say in terms of the framing, so if I get to the heart of that, I'm like, okay, you don't get to save them from pain. It could be you think keeping them home is the thing that's going to protect them from having their spark quashed. But if they're at home with a parent whose dreams can't be met because they can't fulfill their own purpose, etc., who are you to say that that isn't the thing? How do we know? We don't. Like, we're all of us are just taking the best bet we can at any given moment. So this idea that there's one right decision rather than the decision we take on that particular day, and you can change your mind, you can delay school, you can start school and take them out later if it doesn't work, you can do half days. Lots of our parents do that. And if you can, keep focused on the big picture of what matters to you for this kid. Like, we've had parents feedback to us that have now got teenagers or preteens looking back in the early years where they really pushed kids to attend school like full hours and do as much work as possible, and where now they look back and think, oh God, I wish I'd just let go of so much of that, because now that we're here and they're 12, 13, 14, so much of it it's not what matters. I just want this kid to be able to live in the world somewhat independently and experience some pleasure and joy in it, and nothing I did back there has helped with that.
It's really beautiful wisdom, isn't it?
Yeah. And it applies across the board. That said, you can work with schools to try, but to make adaptations and things.
I have to say,
we never have a parent say, you know what, our school has nailed this.
No, I totally do have parents say that. Our school has nailed this, and then they change teachers.
Yeah. And one of the most beautiful case studies we have for emotion coaching is from a recent parent group. And this is one of the beauties of the parent groups as well, where you have parents across a range of ages, like with kids of a range of ages. And so we had one family who have a kid just starting prep and younger children, and one parent with entering high school kids with describing a similar kind of experience with their kids at the same ages. And the parent of the oldest school, they were like, the younger kid with the kids in prep were just like, we don't know whether to pull her out, whether to keep her in because we don't want to normalize not going, whether to reduce her out. You know, we're really wrestling with this question. And the parent reflected back on she said, it was the parent that said, I wish I'd focused less on meeting all the expectations of what I thought I had to teach them at the time because it didn't matter in the end. And then she gave a history of her kids' experience during primary school. And it was like prep, nightmare, had to pick them up most days, constantly in the principal's office. And then no work to show, pretty much no work to show for prep to year 2. Year 3, teacher genuinely connected with my kid, genuinely thought they were a wonderful person and could see the light in them. First year, I saw schoolwork from my kid, far easier. And then after that, new teacher, 4 to 6, same thing. So one difference was a teacher who genuinely was like, I see the parts of you that are awesome, not just the parts of you that are shit, and I'm willing to hold space for the parts of you that aren't great. Yes. So it's
emotionally intelligent teachers.
Yeah. And yet what we're teaching in the education system.
And what teachers have to go through to become good teachers, like they have to pass this, intense maths test that doesn't tell us to teach like primary school kids. Doesn't tell us anything about how they're actually going to relate to those children.
And doesn't leave them any room either. What I love from my friends who are teachers is they have to plan to the 5 minutes of every single 5 minutes of the day. And all of these things must be done. So it doesn't matter if you finished or not finished. We have to put those away because now we're on to maths. And it doesn't matter if finished or not finished because now we have to put those away because now we're on to English. It's the pressure that they are under that is filtered down from the top. But I also have the hugest compassion for and who are employees trying to do the best they can.
Being measured by things that are only important to a few of us, but to make productive little citizens, that little workers that churn out, but even the behavior, when we talk about time, like Meg and I even talk from a, professional development with teachers, is when we've talked about what we want to share with them is around looking at how much time do we end up spending anyway? Because it's the same as what we were talking about expectations before. If you go the other way towards punishment, your behavioral programs are still, they're going to, for the kids that find it easy, that's going to be fine. They're going to conform. For the kids that can regulate well or that just don't want to be in trouble, they're going to, and for the kids that can't, they're going to constantly be the ones, no matter how many times they're put on the steps, sent outside, sent to the principal's office, not allowed to do the thing. And then, oh God, when we hear that they're keeping them in from regulating their bodies at lunch or recess, these kids that need the worst. It's just and it's so other than being a real breach of rights, in my opinion, it's so counterproductive, just so counterproductive to getting those kids more regulated.
It's a completely different lens though, isn't it?
It is. But if we could sit with kids' emotions for long enough to hold space, to be respected, to know that they would be heard, to know that to be heard, they don't have to keep escalating. And yes, it takes time to transition a group of kids from one way of doing things to another, and there is the shift. But it doesn't take more time once you've normalized that way of communication where everyone gets to be respected, everyone gets to be heard. Once you've normalized that in a classroom, it doesn't take more time than having to constantly be interrupted by dysregulated children. But yeah, getting that support in the system is a slow We're part of the fight, though, guys.
In a slow try.
Yeah.
Does help, though, don't they? Just in my own experience, if you don't have a diagnosis or a piece of paper from an assessment from a professional, there's zero movement anywhere, because you're just kind of the overactive mum, and you're a bit of a pain in the ass to the other 28 children that I have in the classroom. And potentially 5 of those are ones who have diagnoses, and I have personal learning plans, and I'm already mitigating everything I do for those children. So you annoying mother over there who say there's something wrong with your child, and actually, you know, I have other opinions on them because there's nothing else that says otherwise. In my experience, that's a hard place to be.
Absolutely.
And as soon as you get reports, the system wants to work for you and with you.
Oh, but even then, sometimes they just go, oh, they've got this, then we'll do this. And you're like, hang on, that's not my child. That's not how we work with my child. So they get stuck on other things. So it's hard. It's hard.
But also, so many of those adaptations would be good for all children.
100%.
So many of those adaptations move more bodies in the classroom. Let them move their bodies. It doesn't have to be dramatic.
Children listen better when they're moving, actually.
Yeah, or even if they want to read like lying down, why can't they read lying down?
Or right,
however they want to move.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why must it be in this particular?
The example we often use is when my daughter loves reading.
Both our kids are reading, or we're reading Harry Potter.
We're reading Harry Potter to them. And often at the end of the day, of course, most kids are a little bit more dysregulated or whatever. So I'll be reading Harry Potter and she'll be like on the side of the couch jumping over me. And after a little while, I'm like, this is irritating me. I'm like, you need to sit down and listen, because you're not listening. I'm not reading this if you're not listening. And she'll go, I am listening. I'm like, fine, tell me what I just read. And she'll bloody tell me word for word, because it was actually helping her listen. And I go, fair call, Mummy should listen to her own advice.
It's so true. I love that you think that. It's so true. We all need those reminders.
It's them staying alert. So it's like any of us, when you're getting a bit sleepy,
it's activating the vestibular system.
Yeah, and you're tuning out or whatever, you move, don't you? Like when you're listening to something, you got to pay attention, you start moving, you're moving your body. But for kids, they need much bigger movement.
100%.
We trusted them. I just, as well, Jules, when you said about the overstrung mother, and also the how unseen the experiences of these parents. I just want to put my feminist hat on for a second and say, in the most part, this is mothers and we have incredible dads coming, but in the most cases, it is mothers doing the primary.
It is the advocacy for their children within an education system, yes.
Exactly. And it is the unpaid labour of women being ignored, and then it is the legitimacy of their experience being ignored. So I just want to speak to that, because it is so important that women don't buy into that in any circumstances, but particularly when it comes to, and that doesn't mean we can't have really conscious, deliberate conversations where we're pragmatic about what the limitations of the school are, if that's where if that's where you sit, but not to allow people to convince you that you're the difficult mother, or that because it is undervalued, because what you are doing doesn't have an exact economic value next to it, is not an incredibly legitimate service to society that is unrecognised, and it is that lack of recognition and value that is the problem, not the work that you're doing or the way that you're speaking up for your family.
I really appreciate that. That's beautiful.
Neurodiverse families have the added cultural beliefs that still are around a burden to society.
Yes.
It's still there. It's still,
and because it's
and it wasn't that long ago that people were put away, or it's there's still a long way to go.
Because it's invisible in disability as well. Often it's just assumed to be bad parenting.
Yeah.
So not to. Yeah.
All right. NDIS successful application relies heavily on a mindset of deficit, comparison, can't do, which goes against conscious parenting of the individual child and focusing on the extraordinary individual unique gifts. How does the caregiver and applicant, usually the mum, not spiral down during the long application and assessment process? How can we protect our little people from the negativity of testing and competency-based environments?
That is such a hard one, because
I even hate it, NDIS, for the disability. I'm like, it's not even the purpose of this, even the word scheme. It's not even the purpose of what it is.
Yeah.
And yet, as I'm entering and my eyes are widened further to this process, I'm like, my God. So I'm rewarded. Talk about star chart. I'm rewarded when I tell you how bad my child is.
Yep. And then to help you, often in support of you, then the practitioners will also talk about how bad your child is so that you can get more funding.
I try writing strength-based reports and we don't get enough funding. So
it's 100% true.
So that is where I think we reframe the system as a tool for us. It is not something that defines our family. It is not something that defines our child. It is a tool, and it's a clunky tool, but it's the best one we have. And we use that tool to the best of our advantage in the best ways we can without buying into what we have to do to, to use that system, to get the best out of that system. That doesn't make it easier, but that's what we do. I think as our kids get older as well, we can name it for them. Often with kids, we, and it's the same with any form of discrimination, because this is it's another form of discrimination. With forms of discrimination, we say, it's like with gender, we say, girls can do anything. You can be anything you want. You can achieve you can be the CEO or the Prime Minister or whatever. And it's this, we can do the same. You're just as good as all the other kids. You just ignore but if we don't name it for them, they're observing their experience of the world. They do notice, they are seeing it, and they will interpret it as their own flaw that they're not actually fitting in. So if we can name what should happen and then what the reality is, that, this system doesn't work so well for kids like us. And sometimes they focus on what we can't do rather than all the wonderful things that you can do. But we know, in this family, we know this is what you can do. This is who we are. This is who you are. And this is just something that we're doing to support the system, and where we really want to change so that this is different for you as you grow, and for all other kids like you. And that's what we're working on. So we can name for them in the same way that we could say on gender, like, it should be different, but at the moment it isn't fair. And that's why we're working on these changes, because sometimes we just want to ignore it and focus on you can. And it's like, but we can say that all we want. And if the system is constantly telling them they can't, or they don't fit, or that wants to talk about how flawed they are for an hour. I mean, imagine if, when I think about having to do that in those meetings, and it's like, imagine if you sat there with a therapist in your relationship and we're just like, no, you don't get to tell me anything about your strengths. You don't get to defend yourself, but your partner is just going to sit here and talk about all the things that are shit about you for the next. I mean, what an absurd way of working on improvement in the system.
Unfortunately, a lot of peds and you will have to do that, because they say they have to see the children as well, and then they'll ask you all that stuff at the same time.
And the kids are in the meetings often too, aren't they?
So one of the things that I always do when there's a session, I mean, my sessions are a bit different to a ped sessions. They're much more strengths-based and child-friendly, but I always preface it is I'm going to see, your mum knows you best of all, and I need to know a few more things about the things that make things tricky for you. We're going to be talking about some of the things your mum notices that's a bit tricky for you. But first I'm going to ask about lots of things that you're good at, but also if you don't like it, you can tell us. If you want us to stop, you can tell us and we'll stop. If you want to add something or tell mum she's wrong, you can. If I've said something wrong, you can tell me too. And then we might set them up with something to play, just so they have some agency in it. We're cautious with what we're saying, but also so they have some agency in, if they're really not liking something, they can stop. And most kids, because that respectful conversation happens first, they're actually, like, they're okay most of the time. And then I'll check in, like, and you as parents can direct this when you're in that situation too. You can check in with your kids and say, hey, we're talking about some really hard stuff right now. Are you still okay? Here we are talking about lots of things you find tricky, and we're not talking about the things you really like at the moment, but are you still okay with what we're doing?
That's
most of that. And then the conversation is open to talk about that later as well.
That's so beautiful.
And you can ask for respectful language and things from your practitioners as well. Like if your practitioner is using language that you don't like, or you can invite them to say, we talk about that this way. It doesn't mean you're not still talking about the problem, but it's just acknowledging to your child that the way we talk about you, the way we respect you is valued. And it's one of the things I do in child protection as well. You can contact practitioners in advance and say, for example, in the neurodiversity movement, we use first person language. So it's like, I am autistic rather than ASD, which is the kind of medical lens, for example. So you can email your practitioners in advance and go, we will be talking about these problems, but these are the ways that we talk about that. And this is the things we don't say in our family. And then even if they don't get it, you've given them the chance, so that when you get to the meeting, you say, I don't know if you had a chance to see my email, but this is the way we speak about each other in our family. So you can raise the bar of expectation about, respectful practice from practitioners as well.
Well done. I love these conversations on our own power and the harnessing of finding our own voice. I really think that's huge.
And the other thing is, if you don't want to do it in front of your children, just say to them, you can see them for the first 15 minutes and you can play and do whatever else, and then I'm going to have someone else take them out and we'll have a chat, or structure it the way you want to, if you can as well.
That's really beautiful. All right, I just want to move you back on to when we're talking about big feelings and regulation, and we're focused on the teenage group here. So one parent says, when a child is neurodiverse plus hormonal plus trauma plus teenager and testing their independence and separation from parent, how do we know which one of these is presenting in front of us and which one to parent? E.g., do they not understand? Are they exercising independence in a potentially dangerous form? Are they overturned, I'm not sure, and overstimulated? Or do they need comfort and boundaries? It's like Jekyll and Hyde.
Is it meant to be overwhelmed, maybe?
Maybe. Yeah.
We would say it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter which one of those it is, because whether they're responding with big feelings because all those things are interconnected and intertwined. And actually so much of the big feelings or big behaviours that you see in neurodiversity is very similar to the things you see from trauma background. So, and hormonal dysregulation, which is essentially an inability to regulate yourself, which is similar to toddlerhood again, right? So when they re-enter, except they're bigger. And
that's what often messes us up, isn't it?
Yes.
I've certainly noticed that in my own reflection. There's, oh my God, you are literally right now have the brain of the 3-year-old that I parented 13 years ago.
Yep.
And yet you're this huge person who's bigger than me and presents as an adult. Like, that is like a mind trip.
Yes, absolutely. And then on top of that, if you're worried about, am I responding to something that you can't adapt to, or you're having a trauma response. But the thing is, it doesn't matter. If it's a big emotion and a bigger behavior, we would still say, whenever you can, go with, if they're regulated enough and you're regulated enough, to go with emotion coaching and to hold space for it. Because it's still about holding space. It's still about identifying your own emotion, regulating yourself, soothing yourself with whatever you need to hear, which might be, oh my God, I am dealing with a giant toddler right now and it's driving me fucking mental. Like, that might be the thing. Acknowledge it. Don't push it down. Acknowledge, be like, yeah, it's really hard. It is really hard dealing with this in this, supersized human that's so dysregulated. It's recognizing their emotion. It's finding a shared language with them, which, particularly if there's neurodiversity, might not just be labels. It might not just be the angry, sad, frustrated, whatever all the words we might use. It could be body senses, could be feelings in the body that we're identifying, or more generalized terms like you seem really overwhelmed, or and we're holding space for that, whatever that is. And when it comes down to, like, often people ask us, and sometimes we catch recordings of, particularly when we're taking care of each other's kids, because there's lots of opportunities to record conflict with 3 and 4 year old together, and how we emotion coach that with the different ages. And that they're like, but I've listened to the recording and was like, but where is this going to go? Where is it going to end? And because people, you especially when you're not, they often expect that, okay, it's a problem being solved and I'm going to fix this emotion in the next 2 minutes. So we're not problem solving. We're holding space for, let them move on, especially with a teenager or older children, when they move the conversation on, when they walk away from it. That's the time to move on. So don't jump to the problem solving until, because they will get to a point where they're like, there's no more, there's nowhere else to go with all this, I've been heard. And they'll be the ones that might, or, you know, you'll get to a point where they're the ones that say back to you, okay, well, what are we going to do about it, or whatever. So holding the emotion for as long as they want to.
And what I hear you saying is removing your own expectations of the end point.
Exactly.
Yes.
And the sense that, because people confuse, often we get confused, and me too, right? It still happens all the time. You're like, let's just solve this problem. But, you know, it's never about
I've got the answer.
Yeah, I do. I figured this out.
I know what we can do.
Let me just show you. If I could just show you, and we can all move on.
Just listen. I know.
Until someone does it to us, so our partner does that to us.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have any ideas, thanks.
And to an adult brain, like my husband often, like my 4-year-old has this incredible meltdowns, right? And sometimes he just can't register it, and so he'll say, "You're not caught in a bear trap," you know, like as if to say, like, come on, like, but to her, she is, right?
Yeah. Her body is like, I am in the death throes here. I need to save myself. And it's that, like, trying not to let those two intertwined things, like, it's, forget the problem. Maybe you'll solve it. Maybe you won't. Maybe it's completely unimportant. And maybe the problem is so big, particularly once they get to teen years, that it's unsolvable.
Yeah.
There is no solution, because it's heartbreak, because it's friends, you know, rejecting them, and there's no solving those things. So it's creating the space where it's like, you're still a space they want to come to, even when the problem's unsolvable. And you're trusting them to have their own solutions, because no one likes being treated, which is essentially what we're doing. Like, well, it's just because you haven't figured it out, but I've got the, right? Yeah. And so it's removing the problem. Put the problem over here. We're not even, and letting, decide what your boundaries are around behavior and hold limits for that. But if it's an emotional expression and you can hold it, even if it's a behavior you don't like, you can come back to that later when it's regulated, when you're through the emotion, when you're through the connection. If they walk in and throw the bag on the floor where you've told them 1,000 times not to, just drop that, hold the emotion. And when there's a regulation and connection, come back to the problem. But it doesn't matter what that where the driver of that dysregulation is. And it's impossible for them to know, or you to ever know, where neurodiversity, trauma, and normal teen exploration end and start. They're all intertwined together intimately.
Thank you. That's really beautiful.
So what I would add to that is, yes, that is the baseline. And the other thing to consider is, like, if you are having like you're full on sleep deprived, there's a big work issue, you're totally overwhelmed and stressed and stuff, and you've got this day where the kid's throwing up and you've got all this other stuff going on, and then you get to the end of the day and you're like, oh, I haven't eaten. I'm hungry. I hadn't even noticed that I'm hungry, because there's so much going on that you can't even define, like, notice all your own body signals. You don't really, there's so many things getting in your way that you can't pick about the one true problem, which is probably, so it might be a combination of all those things. So until you can re-regulate and have someone either hold that emotion, or you go and, if you're an adult, you might be able to just go and do some self-care to do that. It's very hard for you to find the thing that there might be one thing that you need to problem solve, but it's very hard to identify that unless you can feel safe and regulated first. So that is always the first step. If people who have teens who are really finding lots really challenging, and they are expressing behaviour because of that we're finding challenging, and they're having trouble adapting to the expectations, if you want an alternative method or parenting method to a behavioural approach, Ross Green's Collaborative Proactive Solutions is a really great one, because it basically gives you a new way of communicating with your kids, where it's a very clear process for truly understanding and sitting with their perspective first, then having a safe place where you can actually tell them your perspective and your concerns about the particular problem, and inviting them to do that problem solving together. So over time, you're indirectly supporting them to develop those skills. But it's a really nice
and it's
structured,
separate from
evidence-based
the
approach.
Yeah, he's the author of The Explosive Child, isn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and there's an enormous amount of research behind that.
There is
modality.
Yeah, they implemented it with the main juvenile justice system and decreased the recidivism rate by like 80%. It was incredible.
So inspiring.
Yeah.
No, I know we've been here a really long time. I have 2 questions left that I'd love to ask you. Is that okay with you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for hanging in there. All right, question number 1 is, how do we explain to siblings the different needs of their sibling, and that fare is not the same, and the expectations around doing your best might look different? This is something that comes up for me in my home too, just so I'm very interested.
Equity versus equal. Equity versus equal.
Yeah. So how comfortable are you with, like, as I say this, the universal you, how comfortable are you with the fact that different people do have different needs? And how, because usually we were raised on an idea of equality, right, where fairness was getting the exact same amount of cookie at the, or whatever the thing was, or everyone went to bed at the same time. And that was how fairness was defined. So it's about redefining fairness, which I think should happen for everyone, because we are all at different starting points. So everybody getting the same isn't the most fair. It's like, if you're not hungry and your sibling is really hungry, is fair that you both are made to eat the same amount? Is that fairness? Or is fairness you both getting the serve of food that you need? So that's the first thing, because I think it's so hard for us to really sit with how radical equity can look, how radical it can look, especially in a family with neurodiversity or any form of additional needs or trauma, etc. How much one person can seem to be centered can look really hard. So, but first I think we need to get comfortable with it, because often I think as parents we're not that comfortable. We wish it was different for the other siblings so much that we focus on that, and that's where we put our attention, that it's very hard, no matter what our words are saying, for that actually to float through into the family culture if really we're feeling a lot of pity for, or a lot of sympathy or empathy for our other children. So the first thing is, can we really reframe to be like, there will be times in every one of your children's need whether they will need you or other people more than everyone else. Maybe it'll be there's an accident. Maybe it'll be they're really sick. Maybe their husband will cheat on them and they'll need to return home to you. Maybe they'll need to go. There are going to be times in every single one of their lives where they need you more. And for a lot of the early childhood and possibly all childhood, there might be in your family one kid who the rest of the time sits up the top. So practically, how do we support kids around that? So one, I think, is really redefining that family culture around that and making it okay. It is okay that your child with a diagnosis or challenge, that is, for lack of a better term, their cross to bear. Your other child's cross to bear is being, one of their cross to bear is being the sibling of that child. And your child with a diagnosis has the cross to bear of watching their other siblings find things easy that they find really hard. So who's to say what's harder in that, right? This is their growth pains. This is where their voids are going to come from, right? In the language of your work, right? This is where their voids will come from and where their motivation and drivers will come from. The idea, I think, and in practice, I fully recognise how hard this is, but the idea that we provide more sympathy for particular voids than others are really socialised beliefs, and we can reframe that in our family. Practically, what I think needs to happen is providing a lot of space for siblings to also express their suffering. It's like, when there's a new sibling comes in and most people are like, oh, you're so lucky to have a new baby sister and isn't it going to be great? And yeah, they do love that new sister and most kids do want to engage with that baby, but actually it's a bloody nightmare because mum's not there all the time. Everybody's exhausted and more grumpy. We don't go to the same places anymore and it's a shocker, but I'm not allowed to even, I'm constantly told how great it's meant to be. And I think the same idea with siblings that might be experiencing a lot of times where they are put on the back burner or they just have to adapt. Usually it's a lot of adaptation happening from them where because they can, we ask them to change or we ask them to wait or whatever the things are. And it's creating space to hear them about that, where we sit down with them and say, it's really hard being you. I noticed today, yesterday, this week, whenever the space comes, how you had to hide in your room because he was being rough. He took your toys. We had to go to 6 appointments, whatever the thing is. I'm just wondering how you're doing with that. It's providing time for them where they do get a break from that wherever we can. And it's normalizing the conversation about the challenges that brings into our family and also the acceptance we have that everyone's challenge is welcome here. Everyone's feelings about that is welcome here. But also these are the ingredients of our family. And every family has a mix of ingredients with challenge and wonder. And this is ours, baby. So let's work with that together as a team.
I love that so much. Everyone has a mix of ingredients of challenge and wonder.
And it's been okay. They're allowed to feel like it's unfair. They're allowed to be pissed off. That's okay. It doesn't mean they don't love their sibling. Doesn't mean they're disrespectful. Like, they're allowed to feel those things and allowing some space for that where you can, while still holding that developmentally they might be more ready to take more responsibility in certain situations, and you can expect that from them as part of creating equity.
I appreciate that. So the last question I want to ask you before we move to our interview quickfire questions is this one. I would love to know your thoughts on social skills groups. It has been recommended that my son attends social skill groups, but after listening to autistic adults talk about their thoughts on social skills groups, I'm not sure on this. Is it just like the ABA where the aim is essentially to get our neurodiverse kids to be more neurotypical and less themselves?
So I run groups. I would say it depends on the person.
So you run social skills groups?
I've called them that before, yes.
What do you call them now?
You have to kind of call them that for NDIS. I don't call them anything. I just say, does your kid want to join a group? I run them at a school with a lot of kids who are friends at school and have relationships in that school. So I'm very lucky that I get to do that and then send them out into the playground. But essentially what I see groups as being is someone safe to hold space and help them decode things and regulate and repair with their peers, in relationship with peers. And that's where I see it helping the most, in the sense that we create a space where they can try things out and someone's there to hold space without any sort of judgment, and go, okay, well, it's not that you're bad for what you did or you're going to be punished or anything like that, but it's stopped the game and it's really hurt that person. So I'm wondering what we can do, or what do you need to do, so they get to practice that. And I think one of my best, when I had these groups up and running for the 6 months in the school, one of my favourite days was we were playing this game, this complex game with a lot of kids who couldn't stand winning and losing at the start, where they're playing balloon tennis. It's kind of like down ball, but with balloons over thing. Mm. And I had the game, because we had an odd number, they had to be out, and then when someone went out, they had to swap in and maintain attention that whole time when they're out, so they can swap in and help ref and solve the problems or the disputes between how the game. So this was really hard, and initially when I was doing it, I had to do a lot of holding and coaching and going, hang on, I think it's okay, let's listen, and sort of do this sort of stuff. This time, one of my kids, who in particular most of the time she'd lose track of what was going on and just be doing handstands in the corner initially. But she was running it, and she's gone to me, Meg, you just sit over there. We've got this. And for half an hour, I was just like cheering the goals and doing nothing. Like they literally told me to get out of it and ran it by themselves and played beautifully and got this flow going. And that's sometimes really hard for these neurodivergent kids.
Can I just ask you, in the nuance in that, what do you perceive that you've taught them? Or I don't know if teaching's the right word.
I think I taught them.
I think that's the right word, even as I said it. But what has happened there for them to move from I can't tolerate winning and losing to wow, we've managed to flow?
Yeah, I think it's a big combination of stuff. So I'm scaffolding initially and creating an environment that, whether it's giving them warning before something's happening, whether it's modeling, whether it's allowing it to all fall apart and then supporting them with the repair. I think that's what mainly does the most things, the most good.
Why do you perceive that?
The same relationship with their peers and realize that they can still play again, and people won't hold that against them, and it won't necessarily happen the same time the next time, because these kids are often in fight or flight too. I think that stress of losing or having something not go the right way can feel really huge and dangerous. So coming back into that space with those same people, and that would happen at PE at school and in lots of different spaces, without someone to hold and help them do that, sometimes that's really, really hard for them to then get the experience of it working out or the experience of repairing it. But it's hard. And I think if you're not, I guess, an experienced therapist, there's lots of programs out there where you're like very much manufacturing situations, or you're like teaching them on a worksheet and having them fill out worksheets about being a flexible friend or whatever else.
So you need to be really selective about who you sign up to a social skills group, because what the problem that's in that question and that parents have fed back to us is, and that's just, there's a lot of evidence of out there, is if you want a social skills group that's like, you can behave, who you are is fine, who you are, we're not trying to change who you are. Here's how many people that are out there socializing in this way, let me tell you what is going to happen for most people, for a lot of people, if you do this. It's like providing a language. It's like learning another language where you're decoding. They don't have to use that language, and you're not shaming their first language, but you're saying we're going to provide you with some information that you can choose to use about the world out there and supporting you to practice that skills, as opposed to being like, you have a deficit in social skills, and I am going to educate you about how to learn social skills so you can properly socialize. And this is the way that we're going to do that. So does that difference make sense? It's that decoding and support, not making their way wrong. It's just like, is there more information we could give you that might not be obvious to you, that for other people it's already been they've already been socialized to understand?
But even then, what I find with therapists who are trying to do that,
yes,
it's still very cognitive. It's not experiential.
Yeah.
So ultimately, you would have teachers providing more of this in the playground, or like ideally that's what you'd have, and you'd be skilling up parents to be able to support with play dates or carers who are coming regularly who know the kids. Like ideally it would be more in their natural environment, which is why I love the school stuff, because these kids are actually so like they go out onto the playground together. So it's a step in the right direction, but it's still not, you know.
To be very selective, I think, would be
how be very selective.
And how is it? Yeah. And don't assume your kid's way of socializing is a problem unless they are telling you. Do you know what I mean? Unless they're experiencing, I am having problems making connections that's affecting how they're feeling about their, you know, their life.
With that kid I told you about at the start, where the mum was really afraid of his anxiety and his anger, and once she could self-regulate and emotion coach, I think they really thought it was because he was so stressed at school he didn't have enough friends, blah, 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 blah. He still only has about one main friend and prefers to self-regulate playing on his own in the sandpit at school, but he'll socialise quite a bit with his friends in class, but doesn't invite, like he wants quiet time at home and stuff. And we recently had a conversation about it, and she's like, I don't know whether I should push it. I'm like, should we push it? He's actually explicitly saying he's pretty happy with the way things are going at school at the moment. He might get to a point when he's a bit older where he wants to, and then that's a self-motivated way of finding his adaptions. But at the moment, he's pretty happy with how it's going, and he'd be happy with a play date once a fortnight or whatever. It was our external expectations on him that was probably worsening, making him feel anxious.
Yeah, I was saying to Meg, one of the examples I gave about decoding was from my own childhood, where my auntie said to me, I'd had a debate with my uncle about a newspaper article as a teenager, and he just did. I did. And he just walked off, and my auntie went, and I because I obviously looked surprised, like, what's the problem here? And she was like, you know, Tara, not everyone enjoys. That's right. I said I wasn't angry or anything. I was enjoying the conversation. It was just like I was just wanted to talk about the ideas. And she's like, I understand, Tara, but what you need to understand is not everybody enjoys having an argument for the fun of it. And I was literally like, what? I don't just want to argue for fun. Why?
Is that neurodiverse?
It's
it. For all of us, right? So how we would love to wrap up is to ask you both individually or collectively, whatever feels better for you, our 3 quickfire questions, which just offer just a really beautiful recap and insight into both of you and the experiences that have brought you to being just here with us. So the first of those questions is around, can you recall, and if you feel called to share, an experience in your life where you experienced deep challenge, or what we might term as a wound, that you've been able to mine gold or experience the transformation of wisdom out of, that you now, I want to say use or love the wisdom, but you recognize it came out of an immense time of challenge or struggle for you personally. And what we love about that is the experience, the sharing of wisdom that we collectively all have individually from our life experiences. You can't read about that, right? So I just wondered if there were particular experiences that you feel called to share that remind you, when I talk about a time where you've turned a wound into a wisdom that you're now deeply grateful for.
Do you want to go first, or do you want? You can go. I think very briefly, it's probably the birth of my first child and the birth trauma I experienced from the medical model basically coercing and threatening and not respecting my needs at the time. And just how very obviously my whole body shut down. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really solidified for me how important our emotional safety is to our entire function. And I think for all kids and adults, we need to place that at the centre before we can move forward with changing and using our wonderful prefrontal cortex to do stuff.
Thank you, Meg.
Thank you.
Tara.
Oh, so many.
I know.
Look, I think one of the core drivers for me was a sense in childhood that my siblings would animatedly disagree with. I have no doubt. Isn't that the story of versions of not being heard, of feeling like I wasn't fully known or not being heard? And that included sexual abuse when I was very young outside of my family. And it still remains while I turned 40 this year, and I'm so bloody excited about my 40s. And one of the things I reflect on each decade is how that's changed from a trauma that took from me to how it has developed into a trauma that serves me so deeply and drives me so deeply. So my sense, not so much from the abuse itself, but that I thought I couldn't talk about it, that I wouldn't be listened to, that I wouldn't be believed, that children's experiences weren't as important as others. And that's still what drives when I think like, how are the ways I'm going to develop relationships with children and support other people to develop relationships with children that sees them fully seen, fully heard, and able to access what they need, no matter who they are or how different they are.
Thank you. It's a gift to hear experiences. So thank you. My heart and my soul actually really thank you, because it feels beautiful.
Thank you.
Question number 2 is books that have been deeply influential or pivotal to yourself, and or if you could, you would gift every man, woman or child, whatever you would like to define it as, as they entered the world or exited high school, or that they had to read as part of their life syllabus.
So I looked over at her book. I was like, how do I pick a book? Like, we're both like humongous readers.
Like Bridget and I all the time.
It's like picking a child.
Exactly. I did see this one on Tara's that I also have. It's called The Brain That Changes Itself.
Yeah.
I would recommend that for parents who are just getting diagnoses or autism. It doesn't specifically talk about any of that, but it just shows you how incredibly plastic our brain is, and that where your child is at 2, you have no idea where they're going to be. And I do like the mum I told you that I apologise to for giving her lists when I first said. So her kids are now 15, and the child who initially came to me at 4, he had a regression at 2.5 and stopped speaking all words but bubbles, and then eventually came back. And then in school, he's destroying the table and destroying the room and hiding under tables and stuff. By the time he was grade 5, him and his identical twin had IQs in the 95th percentile, right? And then in year 7, they both went off on this school excursion to NASA without their parents. And they're doing really well.
You just can't predict it, can you?
Can't predict it. You don't know what their developmental path is their own.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said. Are there any?
My God, I can't. It's so. But when I think about what we were talking about tonight, from a parenting perspective, the books by Alfie Kohn, so Unconditional Parenting, Punished by Rewards, and he's just really no bullshit about. And I love how incredulous he is about the way we treat children. So it's probably not an entry level, but I love reading him in this because he's just like, this is crazy. Think about it, people. Think about, So for taking things from from reframing yourself and really looking at how adults perceive children in the world, that's one of my favorites to recommend.
I was going to say an entry level into reframing discipline might be, and if there's any like Steinery parents, Lou Harvey Sarah, she's got some books, Creative Discipline, which is basically playful ways to move children through things and accept like their emotions, and it's quite child-centered as well, but it's a much lighter read.
But I want to radicalise you all.
Yeah.
So go straight to Alfie Cone.
Yeah, Alfie Cone's definitely probably not for like the greenest of our listeners.
But fantastic to have a spectrum of what we can look at. I love it. It's the book's on the neurodiversity scale, isn't it?
Yeah.
We just looked across. That's fantastic. I really appreciate it. But,
Yeah, sorry.
no, you go.
I was just going to say, ultimately, we should be treating all children with respect with regards to where they're at. It actually doesn't matter what the diagnosis is.
It doesn't. Yeah. So thank you. Last question we would love to ask you is if you could have a billboard anywhere in the world on any major superhighway, what would it say?
Mine would say, oh God, I need so many billboards.
All the billboards.
Yes. It's not just the way it is. Systems are made by us and they can be changed by us.
Yeah.
And Meg?
I don't know. I'm too wordy for a billboard, I think.
What would your heart yearn to tell these parents that
Trust your instincts.
Amen. So, beautiful women, can you please share where we can connect more deeply with your work together and your work individually, and how we can find you, connect with you, further any conversations or opportunities to join your group, have consultations with you? Can you share all of the places and spaces that we can get in contact with you, please?
Yes, we are shoulder deep in website development, so still coming. So we're just on Instagram at Meg and Tara. Email us at hello@megandtara.com. I'm on Facebook at Tara Broughan.
We're going to have all of these links in the show notes, just so our listeners know that you can just go down in the show notes and all of these links are there.
And just send us a message on any of the socials as well. Our next group is starting on a Wednesday night in April, and when we feel that, we'll start another date. We do run two at a time, so get in touch with us. We our parent groups you can use NDIS funding if you're eligible.
You can also use I'm a mental health registered OT, so you can use mental health care plan for groups as well.
Yeah. So reach out to us. But so on the socials, and we'll be launching a website in April, which we'll make a very big deal out of it on the socials. But and if there's any questions, and I'm in soul-driven motherhood as well, so for any mums in there that've got questions or anything, just reach out in there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a gift. Thank you.
Thank you. Delight. Thank you.
So before we wrap up, is there just any last words that you would love to leave our listeners with as we sign off for tonight?
Just to honour these incredible children that are doing their lives in a system and a world not made for them, and to honour the parents that are, the level of intensity and the distance that they're looking into can be so big. So whether you're one of them and you just need to hear how incredibly well you are doing, and that you're showing up and listening to a podcast like this or doing our parent groups or all the things, just tells me how deeply invested you are and how much real love I have and admiration I have for you, and for the friends and family of those people, to do the thing that you can do to support those families, because they do need it.
And your journey is your own, and there's more than one way to support that your child's development and your family. If a professional tells you something that doesn't resonate, just move on. Find someone who does, and someone who feels really supportive for your family system. That's okay. We'll deal with that. It's okay. We're not all right for everybody. And yeah, I just think trust that. Be okay with it. Doesn't feel right. Move on. Find something else. There's lots of resources out there.
Beautiful. Thank you. Bridgie, would you like to close this off?
Yes. To connect with you, Jules,
is julietenner.love, and you, Bridget?
bridgetwood.life. To connect with us, it's nourishingthemother.com.au. Remember to nourish the woman to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
Thank you so much for listening. We literally couldn't do this without you. Please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
And if you're ready to ask, in what ways can I show up more fully, live more meaningfully, parent more wholly, and love more unconditionally? How can I mine the wisdom from the experiences of my life and expand into those challenges? Then you're a soul-driven, heart-led mama who's ready for conversations and a community that supports her journey. Come join Soul Driven Motherhood. We'd love to have you.
And if you feel like giving back a little to this free content, please rate us on iTunes or Facebook, all of which helps the podcast reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.